Dr. Honarvar is the director of the Pacific Cooperative Studies Unit. She's an ecologist and a conservation biologist whose research focuses on assessing threats to biodiversity and addressing those threats by providing a scientific basis for informing natural resource management decisions. She's conducted and collaborated on a broad range of basic and applied research in marine and terrestrial environments across the globe, with projects in Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Equatorial Guinea, and more recently here in the Hawaiian Islands. Prior to joining the University of Hawaii at Manoa, Dr. Honarvar served as wildlife biologist with the Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources, Division of Forestry and Wildlife, and a research assistant professor in the Department of Biology at Purdue University, Fort Wayne. And so at this point, I would like to turn over our presentation to Dr. Honarvar.
Aloha, and thank you for attending this afternoon. Thank you, Allison, for the introduction. I'd like to acknowledge the UH Foundation and the College of Natural Sciences for inviting me to participate in the Pilina speaker series. Okay, an ecosystem is a complex community of living organisms, their physical environment, and all of the interactions that take place between them. Ecosystems can be tiny, like a single waterfall pool that is home to a unique frog, which doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. Or they can be vast, like oceans, mountain ranges, and watersheds. Ecosystems perform a wide variety of functions, such as purifying the air, sequestering carbon for climate regulation, filtering and purifying fresh water, cycling nutrients, and pollinating agricultural crops. Collectively, these functions are called ecosystem services. The level of complexity and the sheer number of interactions that makes these services possible is staggering. And each and every organism, from the tiniest bacteria in the soil to the tallest trees and largest animals, play an important role in the process. What we know about the processes and the relationships that regulate these services is minuscule in comparison to what has yet to be discovered. One thing that we do know about ecosystems is that their productivity and ability to perform these services is closely tied to biodiversity. Basically, the more biodiverse an ecosystem is, the more productive and resilient it will be. For example, a large number of plant species translates into a greater yield and variety of crops. This broad production of crops variety provides sustenance for a wide variety of species, which support biodiversity within the system. So why are ecosystem services and biodiversity important to us? They are important because all living organisms, including people, are dependent on healthy ecosystems to provide basic physiological needs for survival. Things like clean air, clean water, food. Even if we look at this from a purely economic standpoint, the services provided by healthy ecosystems have an incredible value. In an effort to create a framework and a common language to more effectively engage decision makers and global industry, environmental economists have developed a framework to better understand the economic value of ecosystem services and the cost of losing them. Economists estimate the 2011 combined global value of ecosystem services to people at $145 trillion a year. If we extrapolate the $8 trillion per year increase that the authors identified within their study to today, that number increases to $225 trillion a year. That is 2.5 times bigger than the entire global GDP in 2020. But there are a lot of things that can negatively impact ecosystem health and productivity. Things like habitat destruction, overexploitation of natural resources, pollution, and climate change. They can all affect ecosystem health and therefore its productivity. The impacts of these threats are all around us. Hawaii is regarded as the extinction capital of the world, and we are witnessing an extinction crisis among plants and wildlife right now. Since humans first arrived in Hawaii, 95 of 142 known bird species found nowhere else on the planet have gone extinct. 33 of Hawaii's remaining 44 endemic bird species are listed under the Endangered Species Act, and 11 of those species have not been sighted in decades and are likely extinct. Today, 77 species of animals and 425 species of plants in Hawaii are listed under the Endangered Species Act. And that is just the ones we know about and that have been successfully pushed through the complex Endangered Species Act listing process. Over 250 of the native plant species on that list have fewer than 50, only 50 wild individuals remaining. So how do we approach complex challenges on such a grand scale? Within our unit, we approach this through collaboration and partnerships that bring together a broad range of expertise. And we combine that with a staggering amount of hard work by a lot of incredibly dedicated people. I'll be sharing the work of multiple PCSU projects today and would like to highlight the collaborative nature of the work that is required to successfully combine research, adaptive resource management, and education. When addressing ecosystem and landscape scale challenges, it is key that we approach them holistically and with the understanding that we, humans, are an integral part of the system, just like all of the other life forms. A holistic approach of natural resource management has been in practice through the Moku system in Hawaii since ancient time. This map shows the Ahupua division on the island of Oahu. Please note that the divisions correlate roughly, though not exactly, to streams and watersheds. A watershed is an area of land where rainwater collects and drains through one or more common points. This water collects in streams and rivers where it can be accessed by animals and people, and is absorbed into the ground where it replenishes aquifers and supports plants. It feeds into estuaries and delivers important nutrients into the nearshore marine ecosystems. To address challenges that threaten watersheds requires collaboration on an equally grand scale. The Hawaii Association of Watershed Partnership is comprised of 10 island-based watershed partnerships across the Main Hawaiian Islands. Collectively, the Watershed Partnership work with more than 95 public and private partners and federal, state, and county agencies across 5 islands to protect over 2.2 million acres of forested Mauka watershed lands. One of the things that is incredible about the watershed partnerships is that they are voluntary alliance of public and private landowners that are committed to the common goal of protecting Hawaii's watersheds. Protecting watersheds in Hawaii relies on multimodal adaptive management practices, such as building predator and ungulate-proof fences, controlling invasive species and animals, restoring and planting native species, creating fire breaks, and supporting propagation and outplanting of rare plant species. As you can see in these photos, this is demanding work that often take place in remote, difficult to access locations, and it requires highly skilled, well-trained, and extremely dedicated staff. Along the bottom of the slide, you can see before and after photos of a crew and volunteer group removing invasive grass species and outplanting native plants to create a fire break in Waianae Kai Forest Resort. This is a nursery at Waianae Mountains Watershed Partnership Base Yard. They have propagate 4,000 to 5,000 native and endangered plants a year for outplanting into the Waianae Mountains. Education and outreach activities are also an integral part of all of these programs. In addition to class visits and educational opportunities at the nursery, this program works with local high schools and middle schools to operate student-run satellite nurseries. They also host students from Malama Learning Center for their Namakuli Field School. These programs inspire as well as train local students, and they strengthen the pathway from high school programs into higher education. The Plant Extinction Prevention Program is another collaborative project with many private and public partnerships across all of the main Hawaiian Islands. PEP focuses on conservation breeding of rare and endangered Hawaiian plants and works actively with over half of the 425 endangered plant species in Hawaii. To date, they have constructed 28,000 feet of fence. They collect and propagate 219 species and reintroduce 51,000 endangered plants back to the environment. As a result of PEP's efforts, over 150 rare plant species are regenerating naturally in our ecosystems, and they have even discovered 12 new species. But finding new species is not always a good thing. Invasive species pose one of the biggest threats to Hawaii's native ecosystems and our natural resources. The Hawaii State Legislature has identified invasive species as the single greatest threat to Hawaii's economy, natural environment, and the health and lifestyle of its people. Addressing the many challenges associated with invasive species is the main focus of the Invasive Species Council. The Hawaii Invasive Species Council is an interdepartmental collaboration between the Hawaii Departments of Land and Natural Resources, Agriculture, Health, Transportation, Business, Economic Development and Tourism, and the University of Hawaii. The council provides policy-level direction, coordination, and planning for the control and eradication of invasive species, and prevents the introduction of new invasive species. The Invasive Species Council supports the 5 invasive species committees, which operate throughout the main Hawaiian Islands. These committees are another example of voluntary partnership between community stakeholders, subject matter experts, public and private sector representatives, and they're all working together to prevent, control, and eliminate invasive plants and animals. The invasive species committees on Kauai, Oahu, Maui, Molokai, and the Big Island collaborate and pool resources and expertise to address invasive species threats across the state. Some of the examples of invasive plants and animals that pose a threat to our ecosystem are Miconia, ALBIZIA, fire ants, coqui frogs, and mosquitoes. So Miconia is an invasive plant species from Central and South America that was introduced to Hawaii as a garden plant in 1961. And it has become a major factor in driving the loss and extension of native Hawaiian plants. Miconia grows fast, reproduces quickly, and has a shallow root system and leaf morphology that promotes erosion and soil degradation. While Miconia grows aggressively almost anywhere in Hawaii, it thrives in native ohia forests, where it rapidly outcompetes the ohia and other native plants. Miconia has invaded all of the main Hawaiian Islands, except for Molokai and Lanai. On Molokai, MOMISC works with community members to aid in early detection. and prevent the introduction of Miconia from other islands. In addition to receiving reports of Miconia from the general public, Invasive Species Committee field crews scour the islands on foot, by car, by helicopter, to destroy and remove Miconia wherever they can find it. Here on Oahu, the entire Po'olau watershed is suitable habitat for Miconia. Despite COVID restrictions, OISC managed to survey over 9,200 acres on Oahu for Miconia in 2020. The purple circles on this map, as you can see, they represent locations where Miconia was found and treated last year by OISC. So despite the checkered history here in Hawaii, biocontrol can be a valuable tool for combating invasive species. Modern biological control methods are safe, highly specific, and extremely cost-effective. To help raise awareness about the sophisticated science of selecting and testing potential biological control agents, the coordinating group of alien pest species, or CGAPs, and the Hawaii DLNR worked with a locally based media communications company to produce this short video explaining how modern biocontrol research is conducted. Let's see, I hope this video plays.
Invasive plants and pests can be tough to control once they are too widespread. But some invasive species cause so much damage that something has to be done. Biocontrol is a way to help control an invasive species using living organisms. In the past, biocontrol may have been seen as risky, likely because in 1883, mongoose were brought to Hawaii by sugar plantations to control rats. But back then, there were no laws to control imports, nor any requirements for testing potential impacts. So over the years, new laws helped make biocontrol safer and more targeted. As an example of how biocontrol is used today, let's look at how a caterpillar can deal with one of Hawaii's worst invasives, Miconia. Miconia is originally from Central America, where it has to compete with other fast-growing tree species. And there are many insects, fungi, and parasites that help to keep Miconia's growth in check. But when Miconia was brought to Hawaii, those organisms didn't come with it. That allowed Miconia trees to dominate and smother Hawaiian forests. Researchers wanted to find a way to reduce Miconia's dominance, so they went back to its home to find insects and parasites that evolved with it. They found a caterpillar and its adult butterfly that were not eating other types of plants, so they brought them to a secure laboratory. They were placed in cages with a range of plants they might come across in Hawaii. They were tested to ensure that they will only eat Miconia and will not survive without it. The Miconia caterpillar passed all these tests, so it's called host-specific. The caterpillar doesn't kill Miconia, but reduces the plant's ability to dominate, which helps the watershed and native species. Since 1975, more than 50 host-specific biocontrols have been reunited with their invasive species hosts, bringing balance without causing impacts to other species. Biocontrol isn't always the solution, but when done right, can provide long-term, cost-effective, and natural control. A biocontrol has even saved our native wili trees from extinction. To learn more about biocontrol in Hawaii, visit biocontrolhawaii.org.
Okay, so switching gears now to another invasive species. ALBIZIA is a fast-growing invasive tree, which was intentionally introduced in 1917, both as an ornamental and for the purposes of reforestation. It is native to Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, and the Solomon Islands. ALBIZIA is widely distributed across all of the main Hawaiian Islands except Molokai. It shades out and outcompetes native Hawaiian forest plants. Degrades soil, and reduces habitat for native Hawaiian birds and other wildlife. In addition to disrupting the ecosystem balance, landfall from ALBIZIA causes millions of dollars of damage every year to property and infrastructure, such as power lines and roadways. For example, the 2004 flood on the UH Manoa campus that destroyed part of the Hamilton Library was the result of ALBIZIA branches blocking off a bridge underpass on the Manoa stream. So the Hawaii Department of Transportation estimates that 90% of all calls from fallen trees over the past several years have involved ALBIZIA trees. On the Big Island, BISC partnered with the Hawaii Department of Transportation, Hawaii Electric, and Hawaii County to implement a targeted removal program to protect infrastructure and the environment. Power companies only have about 5 feet of right-of-way access for trimming trees around power lines. BISC negotiated 100-meter rights of entry to private and publicly held lands where the power lines are, and worked with subject matter experts to develop a combined approach of removing and aggressively trimming ALBIZIA close to the power lines. They also use mechanical and chemical kill methods on trees that are further away from the power lines, so that the dead trees can fall and decompose in place without risking damage to the lines. By working collaboratively to identify a long-term solution to this growing problem, the partners were able to bring the cost of long-term control down from $2,000 for removal of a single tree to $2 per tree for incision point application, which basically means where a herbicide is administered directly to cuts made on the bark of an individual tree. Neighborhoods in East Hawaii are inundated with ALBIZIA. In an effort to enhance ALBIZIA control and management efforts, BISC engaged local community members and worked with stakeholders to develop BISC ALBIZIA control teams in what has become locally named the ALBIZIA Assessments Program. By engaging with the local community, BISC has been able to develop a network of partners and collaborators throughout the most severely affected communities to facilitate bi-directional information sharing and collaborative planning, training workshops, and coordination of community-driven ALBIZIA control. Engaging with and empowering local community members has generated a huge amount of community support and has enhanced the efficacy and efficiency of ALBIZIA control and management efforts on the Big Island. Of course, the ideal would be to prevent the introduction of invasive species in the first place, but that's not always possible. All of the invasive species committees have early detection programs, which include plant surveys for identifying and eradicating high-risk invasive plants before they have a chance to establish themselves in the environment. Wax myrtle is an evergreen shrub native to northern Central America, which established on the Big Island, but was successfully eradicated from Kauai after it was identified through the KIST early detection program. Fireweed is another invasive plant that has been widely established on the Big Island for a century, but was first introduced to Kauai in 1990. Native to Southern Africa, fireweed is toxic to cattle and livestock. A collaborative effort between Hawaii Department of Agriculture and KIST has resulted in successful eradication of fireweed from Kauai in 2006. Pampas grass is native to South America, but in Hawaii, it outcompetes native plants and creates a fire hazard. Pampas grass was successfully eradicated from Kauai in 2000s, and in 2020, BISC announced that it has it had also been successfully eradicated now from the Big Island. Okay, so let's shift our attention from invasive species to an endemic species that is critically important to the health and functioning of Hawaii's ecosystems. Ohia are the most abundant native tree species in Hawaii's landscape and the most ecologically and culturally important tree in the islands. Ohia is a keystone species in Hawaii's ecosystem. It plays a critical role in maintaining the structure and function of the ecological community and supports hundreds of other native plants and animals. In 2010, large swaths of ohia trees on the Big Island began mysteriously dying. It took almost 5 years and a multi-agency collaboration bringing together scientists and experts from around the world to identify that the trees were being killed by a fungus. It took 3 more years to discover that it was actually 2 different strains of Ceratocystis fungus, both of which were entirely new to science. In the past decade, rapid ohia death has killed more than 1 million ohia trees on the Big Island alone. Despite extraordinary efforts to contain rapid ohia death on the Big Island, it has also now been detected on Kauai, Oahu, and Maui. Both species of the fungi are present on the Big Island and Kauai, while only one species, the less pathogenic of the 2, has been detected on Oahu and Maui. Early detection and rapid response to the first affected ohia tree found on Maui appears to have been effective, since no more affected trees have been identified to date. If you haven't watched this award-winning documentary about the extraordinary collaborative effort being put forward to save ohia, I very much so recommend it. And if you put in Google search saving ohia, the website where you can watch this for free will pop up. Okay, so small organisms like ants can have big impacts on a wide range of organisms and landscapes. The Hawaii Ant Lab is dedicated to addressing invasive ant species throughout the state of Hawaii. The Ant Lab works in close collaboration with Hawaii Department of Agriculture, the Invasive Species Committees, and other partners and community stakeholders to eradicate newly discovered populations of invasive ants. Native to Central and South America, little fire ants are present on all of the main Hawaiian Islands, except for Molokai. Little fire ants were first discovered on Oahu in December 2013 after arriving from the Big Island, where they had been identified in 1999. The black circles on this 2015 survey map of Oahu represent little fire ant colonies that were identified, treated, and are being monitored post-treatment. The red circle is an active site where ants have been detected, but the site has not yet been treated. Watch the progression over the next 5 years. So this is the current situation on Oahu. These numbers are similar to what the fire ant situation looked like on the Big Island in 2007, when only 27 sites had been identified. Detection of additional ant colonies can be expected to increase here on Oahu. The biggest challenges we face with this small menace include resources and funding limitations, lack of access to privately held land, and a lack of awareness resulting in treatment functionally only being available for sites of public interest. In order to raise awareness about invasive ants, the Ant Lab has developed this incredible website with a broad range of resources that can be easily accessed by the general public. They even host a free monthly workshop that covers ant management basics from theory to practice, including sessions on things like pesticide safety and mixing your own gel baits for fire ants. Another tiny menace with the potential for big impacts on our island ecosystem is the coqui frog. If you have traveled to the Big Island, you have probably heard the mating call of the invasive frogs. Despite a persistent presence on the Big Island, coqui frogs were successfully eradicated from Hawaii in 2012. Eradicating the population of coqui frogs that had established themselves in a 79-acre valley in Lawai took 10 years of concerted effort by KISC, partners, and community stakeholders. On the top of the slide, you can see someone spraying citric acid as a part of coqui frog control. Citric acid is what makes lemons, limes, and Sour Patch gummies sour. And it's not toxic to people or the environment. This is actually a great example of KISC working collaboratively with state and federal partners and local community members to fill gaps in a multi-agency effort and successfully eradicate a large population of coqui frogs from a sizable geographic area. Despite the statewide biosecurity efforts, these tiny frogs continue to evade port detection and reinvade Kauai. Through continued diligence and implementation of an island-wide rapid response and control program, KISC and partners have responded to and controlled 50 coqui frog introductions since 2012 and have continued to be successful in keeping Kauai coqui free. Coqui frog populations have also been identified at 31 sites on Maui. Through the collaborative effort of MISC, partners, and community stakeholders, 22 of these populations have been successfully eradicated. And unfortunately, in April of this year, a population of coqui frogs was discovered here on Oahu in Waimanalo. OIST is working with partners at the DLNR and Department of Hawaiian and Homelands to address this newly identified population on Oahu. As previously mentioned, Hawaii's birds are in the midst of an extinction crisis. The forest birds you see on your screen are in the process of disappearing, and their survival is being threatened from many different directions all at once. Many of the threats are tied to habitat loss and degradation due to things like development and invasive plants and animals. Invasive animals like feral ungulates, such as pigs and goats, disrupt the habitat in ways that favor invasive plant species and prevent growth and regeneration of native forests. Birds also face introduced predators such as cats, rats, and mongoose that kill adults and chicks in the nest. Non-native bird species compete with native birds for resources and also serve as disease reservoirs for newly introduced diseases, such as avian malaria and avian pox, which native birds are highly susceptible to. Climate change also continues to impact birds on multiple levels, from habitat loss to prey availability, changes in plant and insect communities, and distribution patterns of important disease vectors like mosquitoes. It is anticipated that Hawaiian forest birds will lose 50% of their current habitat range by the year 2100. The map on the left shows the number of forest bird species currently present in their usable habitat. On the right is the projection for how many species will still exist at the end of this century. One of the biggest current concerns is avian malaria. Avian malaria is a deadly disease caused by a blood-borne parasite that is transmitted by invasive mosquitoes. Historically, the mountain habitat where native Hawaiian birds like honeycreepers live was too cold for the mosquitoes, so they never interacted with our native birds. As global temperatures have continued to increase, mosquitoes have been found at progressively higher and higher elevations. The problem with this is that mosquitoes are now able to bite native birds and give them malaria. This is the endangered akikiki, endemic to the island of Kauai. Their population has been in decline for decades. The most recent population estimates of about 450 individuals was based on 2018 surveys. However, the numbers are likely even lower now. Avian malaria is one of the biggest threats to survival of the akikiki and Hawaii's other forest birds. Inside the thin black line on this map is the akikiki's habitat range. The color circles show where the Kauai Forest Bird Recovery Project is catching the most mosquitoes in mosquito traps. Historically, mosquitoes would not have been found on those elevations. There are 6 species of Hawaiian honeycreepers left on the island of Maui. The kiwikiu is the most critically endangered of those 6, and it only exists on Maui. Kiwikiu were once distributed across the entire island, but today the population is restricted to just a few tiny areas. Kiwikiu populations continue to decline, even in protected habitats. Population viability models predict that the kiwikiu will most likely go extinct by 2027, if not sooner. Avian malaria is one of the important factors driving their population decline. So what are we doing to prevent the extinction of native birds? The Maui Forest Bird Recovery Project and the Kauai Forest Bird Recovery Project are working with federal, state, and local partners and stakeholders to identify and address the most serious threats to forest birds. A multi-agency working group combining a broad range of expertise with many of the world's leading experts on Hawaiian birds are assessing the threats and exploring every possible option that is currently available. They're even looking at emerging technologies that may not be available yet, but could be soon enough to make a difference for our birds. One option that is being considered is birth control for mosquitoes. There is a naturally occurring bacteria called Wolbachia, which prevent mosquito eggs from hatching if the breeding mosquitoes carry different strains of the bacteria. Landscape scale mosquito control is achieved by releasing only male mosquitoes with an incompatible Wolbachia strain so that they can breed with the females present in the environment, which will then prevent the eggs from hatching. This has been implemented in multiple places around the world and has been shown to decrease the spread of mosquito-borne diseases. Since only female mosquitoes feed on blood, introducing males doesn't increase the risk of animals or people being bitten. Okay, so let's turn our attention down the Mauka toward the shoreline. All of Hawaii's majestic seabirds are federally protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Newell's shearwaters, Hawaiian petrels, and the band-rumped storm petrel are also federally listed as endangered. The Maui Nui Seabird Recovery Project protects and manages seabirds and their habitats across Maui Nui. This collaborative project is carried out in association with Department of Land and Natural Resources, University of Hawaii Foundation, and Pacific Rim Conservation, and with lots of help from community volunteers. Since 2012, this project has worked in the Nakula Natural Area Reserve and adjacent lands in the Kahiki Nui Forest Reserve. to restore suitable breeding habitat for Hawaiian petrels. Like many of our seabirds, these petrels nest in underground burrows. Division of Forestry and Wildlife with the LNR built an ungulate exclusion fence and removed the feral goats, cattle, pigs, and wild dogs from the area. Selective weeding of invasive weeds has helped drive the expansion of native plant species and improve the habitat in the nesting colony area. When this work was started, the nesting colony consisted of 8 burrows and no successful offspring were produced. The number of burrows and nesting activity has increased each year, and in the 2020 nesting season, 83 burrows were found, 71 were actively used by breeding adults, and 41 offsprings were produced. Continuing our journey through the watershed, let's venture into the nearshore waters. Coral reefs serve as foundation of ocean ecosystems and provide critically important habitat for a broad range of marine life. Invasive seaweeds threaten Hawaii's coral reefs by displacing native algae and smothering coral colonies. The Sea Urchin Hatchery Project is a multi-agency effort conducted in collaboration with Hawaii DLNR Division of Aquatic Resources, Department of Transportation, NOAA, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to develop and implement effective biocontrol of invasive seaweed and algae species. This first cohort of hatchery-raised sea urchins was released in Kaneohe Bay in 2011. To date, over 600,000 sea urchins have been released, and more than 270 acres of coral reef have been successfully treated. This is a great example of modern biocontrol methods that are safe, effective, and cost-efficient. In honor of the Sea Urchin Hatchery Project's recent 10-year anniversary, the project and its partners were acknowledged by the Hawaii State Legislature for their profound achievement in the field of biocontrol for marine invasive species. So each of the projects that I have mentioned today is a collaboration which supports and enhances the efforts of the others. They are connected through a complex landscape of direct and indirect relationships across federal, state, and county agencies, conservation organizations, law enforcement, researchers, students, and most importantly, the private citizens and community members of the state. Our productivity and capacity for being effective and achieving the natural resource management goals that we set as a community is highly dependent on those collaborative relationships and on inclusion of a broad range of stakeholders. In much the same way that an ecosystem's productivity and ability to perform ecosystem services is closely tied to biodiversity and is dependent on the interactions of countless organisms. And with that, mahalo for listening, and I am happy to answer questions if we have time. Thank you.